Recording started. Zoom out button.
Hello everyone, good morning once again. Uh, I'm back with you in this third part of The Enemy. So, the last um, point that we came across in the story was that Sado tells Yumi that, tells Hana that he will wash uh, the soldier if Hana would bring the hot water. Look Hana's reaction. I cannot bear you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yumi now. Uh, she can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Sado considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stop and feel his pulse. That is, he suspected whether the man was still alive or not, and he checked and found that it was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The man's heart, too, was yet alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sado said, considering. The question is whether he will not die anyway. That is, as a doctor, he felt that he must operate him. But then the question was that even if he is not operated, or even if he is operated and he becomes well, then again he will die because he will be handed to the police. Hana cried out in fear. Don't try to save him. What if he should live? That is, what would happen if he continues to live? He will become a great threat to both Sado and Hana and their children. But look at Sado's reply. What if he should die? Sado replied. Sado was more concerned with the fact that he should not die. Um, so, he was a doctor, he was a professional, and also moved by humanitarian instinct. He stood gazing down the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality, or he would have been dead by now. That is, he has faced so much of suffering. He's so badly injured that he should have died by this time, but then this man seems to have extraordinary strength. But then he was very young, perhaps, not yet 25. You mean die from operation? Hana asked. Yes, Sado said. Hana considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sado when she did not answer, Sado turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said, and first he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hana came behind him. She she did not wish to be left alone with the white man. Uh, he was the first she had seen since she had left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Just a minute. Yes. Um, Here he was, her enemy, a menace, living or dead. So although she had met friendly people in America, but then this man had no relation with them, and here in Japan he was a soldier of war and he was an enemy. He was a threat to the country, whether living or dead. She turned to the nursery and called Yumi, but the children heard her voice and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth. Yumi, come with me. That's what she said with a gesture. I will put the baby to bed. Yumi replied. He is ready. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hana, sorry, Hana led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on his upper lips. The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man, he said bluntly to Hana. The white man ought to die. First he was shot, then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master saves him, if the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. I will tell him what you say, Hana replied courteously, but she herself was also frightened, although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? You see, that was the dilemma that they were faced with. That is, at their heart, obviously, they were Japanese, and they were, in a situation where they were forced to save an enemy. Uh, you know, so obviously there was that danger that in trying to save the enemy, were they harming the Japanese indirectly? All questions were there. Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. She went ahead and slid back the partitions. Sado was not yet there. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him with her thick lips folded themselves into her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. That is, she became stubborn, and this is what she said. I have never washed a white man, she said, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. Look at the hatred. Look at the hatred. She even doesn't want to wash a white man. These servants are illiterate, uneducated. They don't have a sense of, they are not professionals. So, and they represent the common, the ordinary human beings, uh, the common Japanese, and they reflect their sentiments. Hana and Sado are educated, and they are professionals, and they have got the human instinct as well. Hana cried at her severely. You will do what your master commands you. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hana felt unreasonably afraid. After all, if the servants should report something that was not as it happened. So Yumi, that is Hana, thought it better not to force Yumi because there was that danger that servants might inform the police. That is why she says, "Very well," she said with dignity. "You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. I will have nothing to do with it." Yumi said, "I am a poor person and it is not my business." "Then please," Hana said gently, "return to your own work." At once, Yumi left the room. But this left Hana with the white man alone. She sighed. She might have been too afraid to stay had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. That is, she was reacting against Yumi's anger. And now see Hana's attitude. "Stupid Yumi," she muttered fiercely. "Is this anything but a man? And a wounded, helpless man?" Now, this is in fact the true sentiment of Hana's heart. He was just a man, and a wounded, helpless man. At that time, he was not an enemy, although he had come to fight, but at that time, he was just a wounded man. Now, in the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the um, knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean towel with that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture and must have been very blond when he was a child. While she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was not no longer a child, she kept on watching him until his upper body was quite clean, but she dared not turn him over. Where was Sado? Now her anger was ebbing. That means, as I told you, to ebb means to fall from better to worse. So the anger was becoming worse. It was growing. And she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him. "Sado," she called softly. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. "You have decided to operate?" she cried. "Yes," he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma. Um, alcove. देखिए टोकोनोमा वो जैसा मैंने आपको बताया टोकोनोमा या एल्कोव एक ही चीज़ को कहते हैं। एल्कोव इंग्लिश वर्ड है, टोकोनोमा जापानीज वर्ड है। तो ये कमरे में एक छोटा सा एक अलग कमरा इसे मान लें, जहाँ पे कि दीवार जो है वो थोड़ी सी पीछे तक के बनाई जाती है ताकि एक स्पेस सा बन जाए। तो वहाँ पे फ्लावर्स या दूसरे पीसेस ऑफ आर्ट जो है वो रखे जाते हैं जापानीज होम में। ओके, So he put his instruments out upon it. Fetch towels, he said. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine clothes, fine floor covering. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. But when she went back into the room, she saw that this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packing in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sado replied, as though he did not care, because he had started the operation. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Actually, the operation was, he started examining him. So Yumi would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Saro asked, not stopping for a moment his swift, concise movement. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to his absorption when he was at work. She wondered for a moment, is it mattered to him what was the body under which what was the body upon which he worked so long as it was for the work he did so excellently. This simply means that whenever he was working, he was more worried about the body rather than about the identity of the body. You will have to give the anesthetic when he needs it, he said. I? She repeated blankly. But never have I. It's easy enough, he said impatiently. He was taking out the packing now, and the blood began to flow more quickly. He peered into the wound with the bright surgeon's light fastened onto his forehead. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. Now, I wonder how deep this rock wound is. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. But the bleeding is not superficial. The bleeding is not superficial, that means it's not artificial. In other words, it seems that the wound is pretty deep. He has lost much blood. At this moment, Hana choked. He looked up and saw her face the color of sulfur. Don't faint, he said sharply. He did not put down his exploring instrument. If I stop now, the man will surely die. She clapped her hands to her mouth and leaped up and ran out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her retching. That is, she was vomiting there. But he went on with his work. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient and irritable with this man who lay like a dead under his knife. So he became very impatient. This man, he thought, there is no reason under the heaven why he should live. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless when he realized that this man, there's no chance of his surviving. So he became even more cruel and he proceeded swiftly. In his dream, the man moaned, but Sado paid no heed except to mutter at him. Groan, he muttered, groan if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing it. The door opened and there was Hana again. Where is the anesthetic? She asked in a clear voice. Sado motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back, he said. This fellow is beginning to stir. She had the bottle and some cotton in her hand. But how shall I do it? She asked. Simply saturate the cotton and hold it near the nostrils, Sado replied, without delaying one moment. The intricate detail of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away. Move it away a little. She crouched close to the sleeping man, the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteous, thin face. She thought. Now she begins thinking that her face excited pity, and the lips were twisted. The man was suffering, whether he knew it or not. Yes. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. They came like flickers of rumor, told by word of mouth, and all always contradicted. So learn this word, flicker of rumor. Flicker otherwise means the lights going on and off, unsteady light. But we use this phrase as flicker of rumor or flicker of hope, उम्मीद की किरण या इधर उधर घूमती हुई अफवाहें. So there are rumors that such prisoners are tortured. Prisoners of war are tortured. They are always denied by the authorities. In the newspapers, the reports were always that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly with cries of joy at the liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takema, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now that he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would he not be cruel to one like this, for instance? Yes, there was a general called Takema. Now, he used to beat his wife, so Hana thought that if he could beat his wife, who was in his power, then what would he do to a prisoner of war in his power? अगर वो अपनी वाइफ को पीट सकता है जो कि उसके यानी कंट्रोल में थी, तो अगर उसके हाथ कोई prisoner of war लग जाए तो वो उसका क्या हाल करेगा? So you see, the prisoners of war are always tortured, no matter which country it is. But that is against humanity. Hana was thinking all this. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. It was at this moment that she observed deep red scars on his neck, just under the ear. This means that the man had been tortured. Those scars, she murmured, lifting her eyes to Sado. But he did not answer. At this moment, he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard, dangerously near the kidney. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. He probed with his fingers, delicately familiar with every atom of this human body. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to it, had seen to that knowledge. Ignorance of the human body is the surgeon's cardinal sin, sirs. He had thundered at his classes year after year. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body as if you had made it, anything less than that is murder. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend, Sado murmured. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. So he used to talk to the patients, while performing operation. He used to forget himself. My friend, he always called his patients, and he addressed all his patients as my friend. And so now he did, forgetting that this was his enemy. So you see, the irony was, although he called him his friend, but he was his enemy. Then quickly, with the cleanest and most precise of incisions, the bullet was out. The man quivered, but he was still unconscious. Nevertheless, he muttered a few English words. Guts, he muttered, choking. They got my guts. Sado, Hannah cried sharply. Hush, Sado said. The man sank again into silence, so profound that Sado took up his wrist, hating the touch of it. Yes, there was still a pulse, so faint, so feeble, but enough if he wanted the man to live, to give hope. But certainly I do not want this man to live, he thought. So, he didn't really want the man to live. Just a minute. Yes, look, we have come to the end of this video, and so I'll meet you in the next video then. So for the time being, thank you very much.
Stop button.